Singh, your podcast host, and I'd like to welcome you to the My Brand HQ podcast, all things personal branding for career acceleration. This podcast is for talented, ambitious career professionals like you who are wanting to be perceived as a thought leader, to be top of mind to those that matter, and to make an impact and stand out, be that in your team, your organization, or your industry, and to be inspired by other successful leaders. I will be interviewing high-achieving career professionals who have carved out a successful career in their field and are open to sharing their career journey, their challenges, their learnings and insights with you, someone who is looking to establish your personal brand and accelerate your career. Through my personal branding and coaching practice, I enable career professionals primarily in the technology industry to earn more money, to increase their salary. In fact, I spoke to all of my past clients that I've worked with over the several years and learned that actually overall, they've received an average of 47% increase in their package. Would that be a great place to be? They've also all achieved at least one, if not more, promotions or moved on to a higher level in their career at another organization. And they're looking to advance their career while showing up as the best version of themselves. If this sounds like you, then do reach out to me and let's have a chat. And why do I do this? Well, during my corporate career spanning 25 years, I quickly realized that hard work alone was not enough to get me to where I wanted to be and the success that I strive for. And my belief is that hard work, coupled with creating and establishing a strong personal brand, can both influence and accelerate your career and get you to where you want to be. In today's episode, I will be speaking with David Cummings. He's a Vice President for Performance and Execution, Governance and Risk Management. David is a leader in the IT sector and has developed a wealth of experience during his nearly 35-year career. In 2019, he took a decision to change career direction by joining Sage, the UK accounting software firm, to help support their journey to becoming a great software as a service company, where his responsibilities include portfolio, program and project management, governance and risk management, and he focuses on tracking performance and execution of the product business. David is a highly regarded individual for his leadership skills and experience driving through complex change programs. He's an experienced general manager, an expert practitioner in the strategic planning, design and build and delivery of IT infrastructure and applications in large, complex business transformation programs. He's passionate about business change and how technology can help transform businesses and the way that people go about their daily lives. Before joining Sage, David spent over 32 years working for DXC, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and Electronic Data Systems in the IT outsourcing sector as an account general manager, and latterly as a key leader for a UK government defence contract, leading the completion of a 1.5 billion transformation programme, implementing a global cloud and workplace IT service. During his time in his outsourcing business, David worked on many change programs and helped clients embrace change as a technology transformation exploded with cloud, big data and security, enabling a different way to conduct business. It is a fact that the IT sector is almost unrecognizable compared to when David first started his career in 1987. In today's episode, David will be sharing with us the evolution of tech that he has witnessed during his almost 35-year career, how he chose to embrace the unknown and get comfortable with being uncomfortable in his career, why it's important to surround yourself with a diverse network, to build trust and to collaborate. He'll also share the critical elements of leadership for success, as well as how to remain at the forefront of your game in technology. So let's head over and hear what David has to say. David, hi there, and welcome to My Brand HQ. It's great to have you here today. Thank you for agreeing to join me for a conversation. How are you doing?
I'm great, thank you, and lovely to invite me. I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be super.
It is. I'm really excited. I'm really excited to hear all about your career story and your journey, because you've accomplished so much. So let's just dive straight in. And what I'd like to ask you is what actually propelled you into a career in tech so early on?
Oh, that takes me back. That takes me back a long time. Yeah, actually, when I was at school, I got into BBC computers. I was one of those nerds who went into the classroom to program when the teacher used to roll it down the corridor on this big trolley, and it was a keyboard that you plugged into a monitor. And I thought, that must be good because there's only a few people invited in. So that pricked my interest in IT way back. I was probably 11, 12, 13 at middle school. And when I got to high school, I elected to do computer studies, and it was awesome, especially because our computer studies teacher he was very good. You could listen to him, and he knew his stuff. And actually, I still remember him now. He'd won a Porsche in the lottery, right, or in some raffle, and he was the only teacher with a Porsche, and he was the only teacher doing computer studies. I thought, I'll have some of that.
So it was the motivation for the Porsche, was it?
He was different, so different, and he taught well. And I got in computer studies at school. And actually, when I joined the civil service, I was assigned to a computer department. Back in those days, there was a computer department and a user community. I mean, how's the world changed? But that's really how I got into it early. An interest at school, and by luck rather than planning. First assignment into an IT department in central government.
So when you say you looked at it and thought that's awesome, what about it was awesome for you?
It was just so different. I mean, this is mid 80s, and there wasn't computers on people's desks in those days. There was a room with some computers in that if you had the key you could use. Same with school. So it was just, I mean, it's hard to imagine a world like that now, when everybody has at least one computer either tracking their heartbeat or running their life in their iPhone or the Samsung. So very different in those days.
Yeah, wow. And so tell me then, how did you, if you did at all, envision that tech would evolve to what it is now? I mean, did you ever have any idea of how different the world would be in terms of technology when you were starting out?
Not in those days. Those days when Moore's law was around, I guess it still is, about chips getting faster and disks getting bigger, and they would advance every 2 years, all that sort of good stuff. So 80s, early 90s, not necessarily, although there was some massive IT programs. And at that point in time, you thought, I want to work on the next big IT program. But I don't think, apart from those visionaries in Silicon Valley, people would envisage what the dot-com era brought, and actually what cloud computing brought. And another shift was the iPhone and Steve Jobs and what he did to every industry, really, with some of the inventions and his dogma about how products should be launched. And some of those devices have transformed humanity, really.
Yeah, no, definitely. And just going back as well, like, you started in the central government. Tell me a little bit about that in the early days. What was that?
It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. It was fraught with challenges, lots of great people, lots of different people when you reflect back on their attitudes, their skill set, their leadership styles, their management, and they got things done. And at those time, it was in what, mid 90s, late 90s. There was a lot of consultancy around, where consultancy was big inside government. So you saw the private sector inside public sector, and you saw the good and bad and indifferent of both aspects of working public sector, private, all working together. I've seen that over the years in different government departments, and that's always fascinating. So in a nutshell, it was amazing, some of the programs we did. Some of the transformation programs, major government reform in various different government guises. So you see those different life cycles of legislation, of welfare, but you see everything from the 5, 7, 10-year programs to you've got something to do in 3 months. So it was a good upbringing, and you get to learn from a lot of well-regarded people.
No, I'm sure you do. And so tell me, I mean, you've got a career of over 30 years in the tech industry. So what would you say have been like the top or the biggest changes that you've witnessed? Because you've mentioned you've alluded to it already. What were the biggest?
The transformation from desktop computing to with a transformation at the same time with things like mainframe to server farms to Java. So a change in hardware styles to change in languages. But I guess the biggest revolution has really been cloud and the impact it's had on every industry on the planet. You know, I said before, when I first started out, that was an IT department who did IT, and they built the stuff and the users used the stuff. The IT department is in every facet of business today, whether it's the legal team or the HR team or the people who develop software. Everybody really is now IT literate to a much more substantial level than you were when you were seen as the expert in the IT department. So there's been that huge adoption of IT and the associated services to make things easier, give everybody access to the same things. Imagine all the information we get these days. You can ask Google a question for anything, and you get a half decent answer, whether it's Google or one of the other search engines. So you can have access to a lot more data and MI, especially, than you ever could beforehand.
Yeah, and I agree. There's been so much change, and I think I saw a post actually just over the weekend about Generation X and people who were born into no tech at all, but we went out in the streets and played and just did stuff that we don't rarely do now because there's so much technology for kids to play with, right? And the impact, I remember, the Atari computer and things like that was like rare if you had a friend who had one. And like you say, at school, there'd be a room with a handful of computers that only certain people get to go and use. So it's just such a different era now. When you just imagine the reliance that we have for everything, more so, I think it's even come to like more with the pandemic and the fact that so much of everything we're doing is reliant on technology. So for you, what has surprised you the most then in terms of this whole evolution of tech and the impact of it on our daily lives, would you say?
It's universal appeal and ability for people to use it to their advantage and to do things different. I mean, you mentioned Atari there. I remember when I used to have a computer, your friends would come to play with you because you had a computer. And you'd all be in the same room shouting and screaming. My 12-year-old, he plays with his mates on his Xbox One. But his mates are all in their own houses. And he shouts and screams as if they were all in the same room together. And they're doing the same in their houses because I talk to their parents. And it's a virtual gaming room, state the obvious. But just that is an example of how behaviors changed. I try to get him to go outside. Reluctantly, he will. Reluctantly to walk the dogs, or trying to get him outside to do a hike or go on his bike. You can see when he's finished 90 minutes max, I'm going back in. I want to go on the Xbox. And just everything. My daughter's 23. She's doing an MSc, and she's very disciplined in learning. But her style of learning is all research-based, in front of a laptop or on an iPhone, and even her viewing style of how she consumes television is different to mine, and it's different to the 12-year-old. The 12-year-old will watch it on an iPhone. I'll watch it on a big TV. My daughter will watch everything on a laptop. So people's approaches to how to use an exploit are different, and it's very much a personalized consuming model, and that's what I find fascinating, that everybody uses it differently, whether they're scrolling through different apps, playing apps, reading the news. Subscription has changed.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, if you really do go back and think to when we started out, like in our careers, to what we're seeing now, you'd never have imagined it. Everything is so easy, so accessible, and like you said, you know, your kids can play in their own home, but still feel like they're together. And great now, right, with the pandemic, so it's like you can still have that interaction and that connection. So there's plus points to kind of the gaming industry, let's say. I know there are people who will look at it and frown upon it, but I think there's a lot of plus points as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So tell me, I mean, with your breadth of experience in your career, what aspects of the roles you've had would you say really light you up? So what parts of it are you really passionate about?
Great question. I think there's two things I would call out to start with. Understanding problems and people's understanding of what that problem means to them as an individual, and how you overcome problems, challenges, problems. How do you solve solutions? How do you create solutions to problems that are significant and require people? It's very rare you can solve problems on your own in IT or in big business. So how do those people collaborate? How do you learn from each other? And how do you have great fun? How do you create those teams that really gel and you actually don't realize you're at work? You have fun and enjoyment by working with people who fascinate you and you like being in their company. And if you can get a work environment where there's some great people, you enjoy the company and you can do things, that's what fascinates me. Getting the right team set, playing the right game at the right speed, and you can do a lot with that.
I like that. So tell me, what would you advocate for someone who's listening to this that they need to do? What's the approach they do that they have, to create that environment?
Don't shy away from different types of people. You'll always gravitate towards certain individuals who might be like you. And actually, what's really important is a team of all different types, sizes, shapes, outlooks, beliefs, of individuals who bring to life their experience for you to learn from. You might not like them, and that doesn't matter most of the time, but if you can learn from them and understand where they're coming from and why they think that way, I think that's one of the give backs I would give to people listening to this, that you'd be surprised at what you can learn from people if you're prepared to invest and listen to their opinion, their outlook on life, because everybody has a different perspective.
And that's so powerful, isn't it? You know, what I've gotten from that is surrounding yourself with a diverse network of people, number one, and number two is listening. Yeah. And
I mean, from a leadership style perspective, if you think over the last 30 years, listening is even more important now than it's ever been, because everybody's IT enabled. So even if you were the best IT person in the world and didn't listen, you could probably get away with it to a certain extent. Not these days. You really have to listen to your workforce, your peers, your leaders, and understand how they're feeling and what they're saying, or rather why they're saying it. Don't take everything too literally.
Yeah. So hearing past what they're actually saying to what they really mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a sign of a very good leader. So you talk there about understanding problems, what it means, and how to create solutions. So how do you create solutions? What's the approach you would take for that?
Well, I mean, I'm going to use the old adage from Agile about fail very quickly and learn fast. Everybody, I mean, that's really powerful when you think of that in terms of problem solving, or even invention. You don't get it right first time, and that's okay. If you don't get it right first time, learn from that and try again. But don't keep doing the same thing over and over again and assume it's going to work. Learn from those mistakes, but actually teamwork and brainstorming to try things and rule out things, but at least try them. Rule them out, try a few things. Don't bet on one horse, but actually, when you think you've got the right answer, prove it. And if it's not as perfect as you thought, at least it solved it. You can refine and refine and refine, but do you need that much elegance for it to be perfect? It needs to be good enough. Another phrase we like to use. It's good enough to solve the problem, and that comes at a cost. But if you keep refining it, it might cost more, and you're not getting the return on investment for that continuous refinement, unless it needs to be perfection. And there are some products out there who do subscribe to that. But from a problem solving perspective, try it, prove it, rework it, and then move on to the next problem.
I like that. Great advice. And the good enough stood out there for me, because I hear a lot of people talking about perfection, and it's got to be perfect before you step out with something or put forward the idea or the solution. And yeah, good enough sometimes wins the race, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's about taking the action rather than talking about it behind the scenes. And tell me then, so what are the greatest challenges that you feel you have faced during your career, and what did you do to overcome them?
Right. I think the greatest thing, fear or challenge, is stepping into the unknown and picking up a role that is totally alien or uncomfortable for you. And I've had a few of those, particularly in EDS and HP, and even in Sage. That was a big step for me, moving into Sage. It's different, or picking a role that is uncomfortable. Learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable is a good statement. But that's a big challenge. And in the early days of my career, that was really hard. Stomach churning, sleepless nights, think you're going to fail. But as you grow older, and I think it is a wisdom thing as well, it's all right to try, and as long as you can be uncomfortable and have a support network around you to recognize you're stepping up, that's one thing. Or if you're doing it of your own volition, or there aren't people around, learn to deal with that stress or that adrenaline or that discomfort to learn. And I wish I'd done that more to a certain extent, because when you step into that unknown and do a different role, and roles that people would think, oh, he'll never do that, he's not one of those, it spurs you on. So how do you catapult your career faster than you would ever think possible, if that's what you want? By learning from the unknown and becoming good at it, competent at it, and being recognized for that. So that would be one challenge. The second is the rate of pace of change, whether it's in the political climate or the industry climate, and how that business is moving fast, or also how acceleration of trends in our industry, IT trends, disrupt markets very, very quickly. You might be an expert in your own field in an industry at one point in time, but within 18 months, that industry these days has transformed itself at least twice, and the processes and procedures you thought were your IP, they've changed and they've become automated, or because they're repetitive, you can replace them and concentrate on things that are particularly unique.
So just picking up on that second point then, so that's that second challenge, so the rate of change. What would you advise? What have you learned about being able to adapt? How can you do that effectively?
If you hear buzzwords that you haven't heard before, find out what it's about, because these buzzwords turn into industry standards very, very quickly and become the norm. And if you can understand what they're trying to do, and I'm not saying you need to become an expert in machine language or AI, but at least understand the power they could bring to the industry, whether it's government or the legal system, or librarians. Just think of every process you deal with can be impacted, or every industry, and having that understanding of, I've heard a new buzzword, I don't know what that is, I'm going to do some personal research so I can understand in my brain cells what that means and what it might become as we go through the next 18 months of hype cycle, before it becomes in everybody's language every day of the week, and people talk about it in the supermarket to do things. So that would be a big takeaway from me, that the pace is so fast, it surprises everybody, it catches out a lot of people, and businesses can grow on the back of that very, very quickly, and can become very powerful and very influential to how you live your life, how you work your job, how you manage your career, and how you interact with customers, clients, competitors, and so on and so forth.
And so what I'm getting from that is that you need to keep up with the pace of change by investing time and effort, energy into staying up to date, talking to people, researching, reading, listening to what's going on, so that you're top of your game. Is that right?
That's right, because if you don't, you'll fall behind. Now that's all right too if you want to fall behind, but if you're at the forefront of your game and others advance past you, you feel you could let yourselves down by not just going that extra mile and doing that research. You've got to have a belief that there's an opportunity to do learning forever, and how you build on that.
I love that. I love it. Thank you. And going back to your first challenge that you mentioned about stepping into the unknown and getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, because this is something I talk about a lot, and it's something that I'm aware a lot of people get stressed, anxious about. Their fear shows up, and then they don't do anything. So they don't grab opportunities, they don't try something new. And I experienced this myself when I've transitioned my career a couple of times, and I've stepped into roles where I had no experience, no real knowledge, and had to just figure it out. My experience there is that people around you are willing to help you, to support you and guide you. And I think the belief that a lot of people have is that, well, you can't be seen to not know. When you go into a role, you have to know everything. And for me, it's, well, if you're going into a job where you know everything, there's no growth.
No.
Yeah,
it is. It's a good one, because typically when you get promoted, you're promoted because you've got the ability to do that next job and learn in that next job. You're not being promoted because you're doing it now. So you can't necessarily be expected to know it all and be fully highly competent to start with. But typically that network around you are willing for you to succeed. So they will encourage you, they will help. You've got to ask for help. It's not always easy. It's a sign of strength, but people don't always recognize it's a sign of strength. But asking for help, even just for somebody to explain something, or even to say, I don't know that, I'll go and do some research and come and I'll ask for some guidance. You can flourish that way, but don't pretend you know, because sometimes it's easy to pretend you know, and that could get you into deep water quickly, depending on what industry you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's better to ask and be seen to be asking than to pretend you know it all, which actually, if people can see through that and you're not asking for the help, and then you fail, you mess up,
yeah,
probably less likely to get the support and the let's say the compassion around what's just happened, because there's almost an air of, you could argue there's arrogance there that will actually, they weren't prepared to ask.
Exactly. There's that ignorance, arrogance, and I guess what you need to get to quickly is a trust network where people trust you and are okay for you to fail as long as you learn from it. So having a leadership group or a mentor or a coach who can provide guidance, but also encouragement to try and learn from that and build on that, and seek advice and consult. These days, the tools we have, I mean, the pandemic's helped with this, but there's so much collaboration tools available these days that there's a virtual team around, you probably just forget it's there. So if you've got a coach or a mentor, that helps, but also lots of people in your circle of what you do, or even in your direct team, people will help, but you've got to give back as well. You can't just take. You've got to give back, and getting that balance right will really help anybody in their day-to-day job, in their aspirations of career, and where they want to be in 5 years' time, 10 years' time. The problem is not everybody plans out where they want to be in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. And opportunity, the old phrase, opportunity knocks when it's least expected. You've got to be ready for that. And if it's not ready for you, be ready the next time it comes.
You know, what you're sharing today is really powerful stuff. And a lot of this it supports what I share in, you know, when I'm talking about your personal brand as well, because I think the network, building that trusted network around you is so important. And sometimes people make the mistake of not valuing that until they really need it. And my belief is that actually, if you build your network, your circle of influence, and nurture that over time, then when you do find yourself needing help, people are even more open to helping. Not to say, to be fair, that people generally like to help. They like to support. And so having that network just makes it so much easier when that time arises. And it's to your point as well about give and take. Sometimes people feel, well, actually, there's nothing I can offer, but you can surprise yourself with what other people, it's the reverse mentoring is a term I've come across, where it works both ways. And we talked about the change in tech over the years, and you think about generations now, and, you know, it could be your kids can teach you things about, you know, tech and what's going on. So be open to learning from each other and supporting each other. And that's so important. So thank you for sharing that. The other thing I wanted to just come back to is being uncomfortable and asking for help, because again, I think a lot of people don't, okay, so a broad statement here, but a lot of people don't like change.
Yeah.
And so that creates that anxiety, the uncertainty for people. But what I've learned, and I'm guessing from what you're saying here, you've probably experienced yourself, is that by getting comfortable with that and making yourself uncomfortable, you used the word earlier, this is where you get to flourish and you get to really recognize your capabilities, because you stretch yourself to that extent. If you never do that, you don't know what you're truly capable of. And so by taking those steps, taking those risks, and for me, it's asking, what is the worst that could happen? So what's your take on that?
So everybody finds change different, but if you don't embrace it, you'll be left behind. So you've got to find mechanisms to actually embrace change, even when you're uncomfortable with it, and to go with, well, let's see how it plays out. It actually might bring some goodness. But change is more rapid than anything these days in all aspects of life. So you've got to embrace that and learn from it and experience it, hopefully in a positive way. There will be negative aspects of change that bring stress and concern, whether it's personal or career-wise. But how do you cope with stress and make it positive? How do you get that change enthusiasm that the adrenaline takes over and you actually become a change agent? So that's one aspect of it. And it's always going to happen. So if you're not going to be comfortable with it and you're always afraid of it, you're going to be afraid for a long time, because everything changes. So getting a set of perceptions, or even a set of personas where you can act yourself, that you're not really being yourself, but you're demonstrating you've got some behaviors. You might be an introvert, and if you can be an extrovert for a while and embrace it, and understand what that, and then internalize it to help your introvert to comprehend what's going on. That would help. And you've got to have a number of versions of yourself to actually adapt to the situation, whether it's a change program or just the world's changed, like what's happened with the pandemic and how you deal with that, coping mechanisms. But that change, it is the only constant, really, isn't it?
It is. It absolutely is. And adapting to change is the big thing there. It's being aware, being mindful as to what is going on around you, and how can you adapt to still be your authentic self in the way that you show up, but being able to adapt to situations, to change, to people, and what can you do differently to get the best results.
Yeah, and if you can go through that with a team or pairs of leaders who you work with now, you reflect back on some of the people you've worked with in the past, over the past decades, and they're lifelong friends. You might not speak to them every day, but those experiences of change that you lived through on some of the big programs or some of the challenging times, you can always count upon them as a lifetime friend. And if you ring them up 5, 6, 7 years and say, can you remember this? You have a good laugh about it and a reminiscence. But if they want something, you'll step up and say, I'll help you with that. You will go that personal extra mile because you've experienced something in that relationship that was very personal to you as a team, or you as a pair, or you as a group of leaders, and you've learned from that. And it was probably, looking back on it, fantastic. At the time, it might have felt like pain and challenge. But when hindsight's a wonderful thing. And when you reflect back, you'll have had some rewarding times with some fantastic individuals that you think, wow, we almost changed the world in certain aspects and certain things. And that's great.
Yeah, you're giving me goosebumps now listening to you, because what you just said there, I think people sometimes don't recognize that that's the case. What you just said there, when you've worked together, when you've worked on projects or creating massive transformation, change, or solving those problems, there's a certain dynamic that gets created in those relationships. And to your point, X years on, you could bump into that person or reach out to that person, and you can, to a large degree, still pick up that relationship.
Yeah.
Because of absolutely. What we've been through together at that time.
Yeah, it is. It's funny. I've had a few phone calls recently with people I used to work with 4 or 5 years ago, and you pick up the conversation as if you were working together just yesterday. And you've earned that respect between each of you, that you can ask for help, you can solve a problem. And that's easy these days with social media and contacts. But I mean, thinking back on some of the things and some of the people I work with, we had no fear of failing. We'd go after, and I mean, when we were in sales, and you believed in what you were selling, you believed the brand you worked for, and you thought you could take on the world. And it was so fun.
Yeah, totally agree with you. And the reason I think I'm getting those goosebumps is because me and you, we worked together how many years back, right?
At least 12, 15, between 15 and 12.
Yeah, because it was over a long period of time as well, across a couple of accounts, and reaching out. We've not spoken for several years, and hopped on and just had a chat. Okay,
yeah.
To get to this point of having this conversation today. And that's been the case actually with a number of the people I've brought onto the podcast. Is the people I've worked with at some point, or I know through what I've done over the years, and may not have spoken to them for several years, but reached out, and we can have this conversation. And
yeah.
It's for me, it's very, very rewarding. It's just great to get insights like what you're sharing today. So thank you so much. And so tell me, what have you noticed, would you say, in terms of change in leadership style in organizations over the years? Because having worked, I emphasize, I'm not trying to emphasize your age here at all, David, but in terms of the extent of your and the breadth of your career, are there any specific changes you've noticed in terms of leadership style?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I've worked for some great leaders. I work for some great leaders now, and over the years, their characteristics have changed. I mean, a number of things, especially in today's climate. You have to be visible. You have to be always on. You must show empathy. We talked before about listening. So you have to listen to so many different levels of the organization to understand how the organization's feeling, what the culture is, how do you change that culture. But that point of presence and always being visible, when at a time when well-being, life balance, lifestyle is so important because everybody's is being transformed, that big businesses, great businesses are encouraging well-being and life balance. And whilst you're the leader, you've got to be always present and transparent and show great gravitas with empathy. They've also got to show that they're getting their well-being and life balance right. So you're juggling so many different things, but sound judgment has never changed. Good leaders in the past, managers in the past, great leaders now typically have sound judgment, but have to have that always on gravitas. And as we said before, an understanding of trends and where their industry or other industries that could transform theirs are heading. And of course, what's the competition doing as well?
And a big thing takeaway from me there is always on. It's all invisible. It's about having that, almost like what we used to talk about, the open door policy. You're accessible, you can have conversations, and then also leading by example.
Yeah, absolutely, by example. And I mean, the open door policy, great. The door is forever open, because social media, whether it's Yammer, Teams, teleconferences, Zoom, anybody can say anything to you at any time, publicly or anonymously, and you've got to be able to deal with that, react to that. And sometimes you're judged on your reaction, sometimes you're judged on you haven't reacted. So it's getting that style that you're comfortable with and you can grow into, but people want to actually see good leadership styles and how they can use that to benefit themselves. But actually, if you aspire to be a great leader, how do you pick all the aspects of great leaders and mesh them all into one and say, I want a bit of everybody? Because there's a lot of great leaders in the world today in different industries. And I've been very privileged over the last 30 years to work with some great leaders. I won't name them, but I've worked with some great ones.
They know who they are, right?
They do. They do.
And so just leading on from that, what advice would you give to emerging leaders, let's say in the tech industry or in general?
Be curious. Be curious. Understand what the trends are and why they could be important. Investigate. Always learn. Like I said before, your learning career is never over. And establish yourself with people who can explain things if you don't understand it, and watch and research and look at big brands today and try to appreciate why they're significant in the market. Some of the biggest brands on the NASDAQ today weren't around 30 years ago, and they're phenomenal. You would never have thought that would occur. They've transformed large industries or created new industries. So when's the next big wave come, and how can you anticipate that? So watch and learn and listen, and try and take traits and experience from other leaders around you, the good and the bad. Because if you see some bad leaders, you can use that to your benefit as well. You can say, I don't want to be like that. I want to be like this. So trends are important, but actually just learning, because trends will come and go. Some of them will stick, but the next trend will turn up. We used to say, when we all used to do cloud selling, IT is the best fashion industry because it was whatever's fashionable out of Silicon Valley was the next fashion that we were selling. And fashion can be very fickle. IT can be very fickle, or it can change when you don't expect it to. But it just takes a few senior business leaders or companies to invest heavily, and it can stick globally. And I guess the other takeaway is the world's a lot smaller these days. So whatever happens in one hemisphere or region can quickly get worldwide adoption and affiliation and following.
Yeah. Wow. A lot to think about there, definitely. And I think that there's so much for emerging leaders to consider, but at the same time, like you said, the world's a smaller place. It makes it that much easier to be able to see what's going on, to learn from others, to reach out. Social media, the internet, everything is so much more reachable and accessible for people to. It's almost like there's no excuse.
No, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. It's not just news channels these days that you find out what's going on in the world. There's so many different feeds, all on that small computer. We're talking about mainframes and desktops in the 80s. Everybody's got either something monitoring their pulse, a watch or something to check the heartbeat when they're running or whatever. So that's one computer. And everybody's got a phone, and that phone is not a phone these days. It is the personal computer, what we thought personal computers were in the past, that you can do everything by that. Order a meal, book a doctor's appointment, get some drugs, find out what's happening in Bali this week, where you book your holiday, and how much of that is virtual. You think you're talking to somebody on a collaboration tool, it's a robot.
Yeah, totally. The world has changed completely. So just moving on from that then, what do you see as the future trends in the workplace and the new habits, particularly given the massive impact of the global pandemic?
Right. I think there'll be a nomadic workforce where people will recognize that they can work for anybody around the globe, where they might have been regional or country based, and they might work for a global company but actually be in a region. So I think there'll be great opportunities to work anywhere in the world, albeit probably virtual, rather than the past. You used to get secondments or expat deals, or you'd be in the oil industry and you'd be traveling to different oil fields. I think that sort of thing will change. I think that there will be a mix of balance. I think if you follow what's happening around collaboration services, Teams and Zooms, that will continue even when we go back to the new normal, and that will be much more used for normal things, meetings, etc. And offices won't necessarily be a place you go to work. There'll be a place you go to meet and collaborate, where face-to-face collaboration is important, rather than being there for 5 days a week or 10 hours a day or 15 hours a day or 7 days a week. It will be, you're there for 3 or 4 meetings, and if you can sort your diary out and you can do all the collaboration in 2 or 3 days, you be at home working when you have to, do that next presentation or that next white paper or the next set of Power BI apps or whatever you're building, or even some coding. You'll do that at home rather than in the office. But so there's two things: the office and the collaboration tools. But I think also people will have a sense of, well, what I used to do isn't actually necessarily what I want to do going forward. So people will adapt their lifestyles, recognizing what the last 18 months has taught us all. And I'm hoping people will become more appreciative of each other. You don't see that many people apart from the digital you. And when you see people, it's nice to stop and talk and have human interaction. We're supposed to interact with humans. Doing it on a flat screen is wonderful, but it's just not the same.
So do you think you'll be getting back out and about as soon as you're able to, work-wise? I mean,
I think it'll be very staged. Our company has said that we will go back to offices. We're not one of these companies who've said we're not going to have any offices anymore. I think there's a recognition throughout the company that collaboration is important to get things done. And at times you're going to have to be a group of people in a room. How long the social distancing occurs will influence how many people you can get in the room. But the collaboration is so important, that will continue, but in a different way. offices might be half populated. I can envisage, I'm sure it's happening now, lots of offices will be converted to apartment blocks, and they'll become nice loft conversions, or really nice apartments, and you'd be able to say, I used to work in that building 20 years ago. People are living in it now. So there'll be a lot of that. There'll be a lot of change because of that. But also I think that there'll be new companies created with new USPs, new markets created, and people will recognize that there is a shift in people's attitudes and lifestyles that some people do very well out of that. It goes back to your point about change, embracing that change when it comes.
Yeah, totally. And my final question, David, is if you were to do it all over again, what would you do differently?
I suppose the easy answer is not much. I would do it all again the same way. But thinking about that, I guess I would watch more and listen more. In my early career, when you're young, you think you know the answer to everything, and sometimes you do. But I would take it all in more and absorb, and become that fly on the wall, just observing a bit more, so I can understand why that's happening, and why is it happening like this. Because there's times over the last 20-30 years where you think, why did that happen? Why did that happen that way? And that was very complex circles spinning that moves you in a direction, and you don't always see that in the moment. But reflecting back, you think, right, I could see it was always going to happen that way. And no matter what you did, what you said was never going to influence it, because there was different things. So I guess I would watch more, understanding that moving forces has an impact, even though it might not feel wrong at the time or just horrific. You couldn't influence it.
Yeah. David, thank you so much for chatting with me today. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear all about your journey, your learnings, your experiences, and your shares for our audience. So I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you. Good questions. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, then please do subscribe to the show so you don't miss any future episodes. And remember to leave a review telling us about your key learnings and what you enjoyed the most. And do share this podcast with your friends and colleagues so we can spread the word on the importance of personal branding when it comes to your career advancement. And also ensure that others can benefit from these invaluable insights from many inspirational leaders. I will be eternally grateful. And if you are looking to earn more money, to get promoted, to secure your next role and advance your career, and would like me to support you personally on that journey to get you there, then reach out to me and let's arrange a chat. Alternatively, why don't you check out my personal branding launchpad, a group training and mentoring program. Finally, if you'd like to connect with me directly, then do reach out and direct message me on LinkedIn. You can find the link as well as any other resources mentioned in the show notes. I'll see you next time.